Last week, the Department of Justice finally got around to releasing over 3 million pages of records related to their Jeffrey Epstein investigations. This massive data dump, which includes everything from emails to vacation photos, was intended to be the final word on a scandal that has lingered over the global establishment like a particularly persistent bad smell. The files read like a who's who of the people who run the world. We have two US presidents, a rotating cast of British and European royals, and almost every significant name in business, law, and high finance. Many people who claimed that they only had tangential relationships with Epstein were shown to be a lot closer than they had admitted. It would appear that the tech elites had to invent AI chatbots to replace Epstein, but while he was alive, he seems to have been the person they turned to get their questions answered. The release of these documents was once again a total mess. It's worth noting that unlike Jeffrey Epstein's parties, to open the files you had to confirm that you were over the age of 18. On the first day of the release, the DOJ website featured a convenient download all button that allowed journalists to grab the entire data set all at once. Once the department realized that people were actually using it, that button was removed, replaced by a system that requires you to download files one by one. Files have been appearing and disappearing. If you read a document and didn't save it, there was a good chance that when you went back later, it would be gone. A document known as EFTA 0166067, which contained a list of unverified FBI tips about the US president, briefly became the most famous PDF on the internet before it was scrubbed from the site the next morning. As of this recording, it has not been re uploaded. The DOJ later explained that they were rectifying redaction errors, so maybe it'll reappear soon. The first big scandal to break was about Bill Gates, where we learned about a more practical side to his relationship with Epstein. In two frantic typo ridden emails that Epstein sent to his own inbox in 2013, he appeared to suggest that Mr. Gates contracted an STD from Russian girls and asked Jeffrey to get him antibiotics so that he could secretly give them to his then wife Melinda. Epstein also claimed to have provided Adderall to Gates for his bridge tournaments. Gates has denied these claims, saying that they are the work of a disgruntled liar who was upset at being cut off. If it's true, though, it's a damning indictment of the way the American healthcare system works, where even one of the wealthiest men in the world couldn't get a doctor's appointment and had to go to a convicted sex offender for his basic healthcare needs. I wonder if Warren Buffett, Gates's bridge partner, found it frustrating having to listen to him talking at a mile a minute all hopped up on speed. We'll never know. Despite all of the headlines, this wasn't by any means a full release. The DOJ said that they had over 6 million pages of records, but they've only handed over about 3.5 million. The missing records include bank and brokerage records, along with communications with foreign governments, and basically the things that people were actually looking for. Lawmakers have pointed out that the law forbids redacting files just to avoid reputational harm or due to political sensitivity. The DOJ seems to have treated those guidelines as mere suggestions. The redactions themselves are frankly bizarre. In many cases, the same document has been uploaded multiple times with completely different redactions each time. We've seen instances where a case number is blacked out in one version but visible in another, and the only thing that was supposed to be redacted was victim names. My personal favorite was the decision in one file to redact the JP from JP Morgan, presumably to protect the privacy of a multi-billion-dollar investment bank that has been a household name for over a century. On top of that, there's the sheer sloppiness of the work. The New York Times and the AP found that the Department of Justice had accidentally released unredacted photos of victims, including some who had never come forward publicly. Once they were informed about their mistake, they pulled those files, but it's a bit rich to hear the government talk about protecting victims while they're busy publishing their private photos to a global audience while blacking out the names of Epstein's suspected co-conspirators. The law also stated that every redaction had to come with a written justification. So far, those explanations are nowhere to be found. Instead, we still have entire 100-page files that are just solid black blocks. Even for documents held back for national security purposes, the DOJ was supposed to provide unclassified summaries, another requirement that appears to have been filed in the same place they keep the download all button. This doesn't actually feel like a true effort at transparency. As a comment on one of my earlier videos said, "Oh no, they're finding needles. Quick, add more hay." Sometimes it can be a struggle to find time to learn new things, but today's sponsor, Brilliant.org, makes it easy to learn with quick, fun lessons that you can do anywhere right on your phone. What sets Brilliant apart is its focus on active learning. Instead of passively watching a tutorial and hoping that the information sticks, you're presented with problems that force you to think through concepts in real time. I'm told that this type of interactive learning is 6 times more effective than just watching a video, as it builds up true intuition rather than just rote memorization. Brilliant offers thousands of lessons across a huge range of topics, from foundational math and science to the logic behind programming and AI. Lately, I've been working through their course on scientific thinking. It's both fun and the perfect alternative to mindless scrolling. If you want to try Brilliant out for yourself, you can head over to brilliant.org/Patrick, scan the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description to start for free. Brilliant is offering my viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to their entire library of courses. The Epstein files began with the work of Marie Villafana, the original lead prosecutor, who, unlike her superiors, actually seemed interested in doing her job. By May 2007, Villafana had put together an 82-page prosecution memo and a 53-page draft indictment that would likely have ended Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and abuse. Villafana didn't just focus on the abuse, she followed the money, broadening the investigation to include money laundering and the operation of an unlicensed money transmitting business. She subpoenaed Epstein's banks for records about his financial activity and even contacted his most important client, the billionaire Les Wexner, to ask about their business arrangements. Bloomberg reports that this sent Epstein into a total tailspin. He fired off a series of typo-laden emails to his lawyers, who began a campaign to have Villafana removed from the case. They argued that her tactics were unduly invasive, that she was pursuing baseless claims to pressure their client into a plea deal, and pressured her supervisors to remove her and others from the case, or throw the case out altogether. The most remarkable part of this story isn't that Epstein tried to stop her, it's that it worked. Despite the prosecutor warning her superiors that Epstein was a continuing threat, she was ordered to stop her investigation and begin plea negotiations. The result was the infamous sweetheart deal overseen by Alex Acosta, which not only gave Epstein a few months in a county jail, but also provided blanket immunity to any potential co-conspirators, essentially turning the U.S. Justice Department into a private security firm for Epstein's entire social network. You might look at this deal and think, well, I guess this happened because he was really politically connected. He was good friends with Bill Clinton at this point in time. He had visited Clinton in the White House, and they'd been jet-setting around the world for close to a decade by then. That doesn't really add up, however. As connected as Epstein was, he wouldn't have been nearly as connected as Dennis Hastert was. Hastert had been a congressman for 20 years and was the 6th longest serving Speaker of the House in history. By the time FBI discovered that he was a serial child molester, the statute of limitations had run out on his actual crimes. But rather than giving him a sweetheart deal, the DOJ used financial technicalities to put him behind bars in 2015, convicting him for the way he structured his hush money payments to his victims. Political connections don't explain Epstein's sweetheart deal. There had to be something more. If political connections don't explain how Epstein remained untouchable, maybe we should look at his more hands-on approach to reputation management. One of the most famous stories about Epstein involves Vanity Fair editor-in-chief Graydon Carter. In 2003, while reporter Vicky Ward was working on a profile of Epstein and interviewing the Farmer sisters, who had first reported Epstein to the FBI in 1996, Epstein decided to take the editorial process into his own hands. Early one morning, Carter arrived at his office to find Epstein already there, standing alone in the reception area. Epstein reportedly spent that morning and many subsequent phone calls torturing and berating Carter, demanding that he publish nothing about Epstein's involvement with teenage girls. When the verbal abuse didn't work, the threats became more physical. A live bullet was left on Carter's doorstep in Manhattan, and shortly after, the severed head of a dead cat was found in the yard of his country home. While there was no evidence that this was done by Epstein, the message was apparently clear enough that Vanity Fair decided to scrub the abuse allegations from the final article. While this mob-style intimidation might have worked on a journalist, it's not reasonable to believe that it would have intimidated the FBI, who around the same time were busy conducting the largest mafia takedown in the agency's history. They rounded up 127 members of the 5 mob families in New York. They were hunting down Whitey Bulger, who they believed had been involved in 19 murders. It's hard to believe that the same federal agents who were unfazed by violent killers were somehow terrified of a creepy pedo whose primary method of intimidation was showing up early for a meeting and leaving a dead house pet on a porch. It's not exactly The Godfather. This leads us to another popular theory that people have discussed for years, that Epstein wasn't just a well-connected predator, but an intelligence asset. A journalist named Vicky Ward wrote an article for the Daily Beast in 2019, which said that Alex Acosta told investigators that the case was above his pay grade because Epstein belonged to intelligence, a claim that he has since denied. A newly released document, file EFTA 000900314, gives us a look at why that theory might have had some weight within the FBI. This is an FD 1023, a form that the FBI uses to record information from a confidential human source. According to the Attorney General's guidelines, a CHS is someone believed to be providing useful and credible information, though the FBI notes that these reports are often unverified raw intelligence. This particular source makes some staggering claims. They allege that Alan Dershowitz specifically told Acosta that Epstein belonged to both US and Allied intelligence services. The document goes even further, claiming that Epstein had trained as a spy under former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. The document doesn't just implicate Epstein either. The source claims that Dershowitz himself was co-opted by Mossad and that Mossad would call Dershowitz to debrief him after his phone calls with Epstein. The document even manages to implicate the White House, alleging that Donald Trump had been compromised by Israel and that Jared Kushner, a former student of Dershowitz's, was the real brains behind the operation. Now, we have to take these claims with a massive grain of salt. One of the strange things about this document is that it refers to previous reports which don't appear to be included in the files. Based on what I can find online, a confidential source can range from a highly placed operative to someone who just enjoys sharing gossip on encrypted messaging apps. But the fact that the FBI was recording these allegations of foreign influence on US officials by Israel, Russia, and the UAE as late as October 2020 shows that the intelligence angle may not have been just a conspiracy theory, but without more information, it's impossible to know. If you're looking for a reason to appreciate your own neighbors, even the ones who practice the drums at 2 in the morning, you might want to take a look at Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's block on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Jeffrey Epstein lived right next door to him in a massive 7-story townhouse, and Bill Cosby lived right across the road. Woody Allen lived just one street away and was constantly dropping by Epstein's house with his wife/daughter to visit. I imagine that living on a street like that, you'd hire armed guards to bring your kids back and forth to school. Lutnick recently gave an interview on a podcast called Podforce One, describing how he and his wife once visited Epstein's home for a tour around the time he moved into the neighborhood, only to be shown a massage room and hear a comment so revolting that they decided, in the 6 to 8 steps it took to get back to their own house, that they would never be in a room with Epstein again. Lutnick forgot to mention in that interview that the prior owner of his house had been Jeffrey Epstein, and that the real estate records show that the transfer was listed for $10 and other valuable consideration. Now, this was back in 1998 when house prices were a lot lower than they are today, and it might have been cheap because of the dodgy neighbors, but it's still a remarkably good deal for a Manhattan townhouse. Howard tells a very compelling story on the podcast of his moral clarity, but the files suggest that this wasn't his last run in with Epstein. The new documents include emails from 2012 showing Lutnick and his family planning a visit to Epstein's private island on their yacht. Epstein's assistant even sent a follow-up email on Christmas Eve that year saying, "Nice seeing you." This was 4 years after Epstein's guilty plea, meaning that Lutnick, who lived right next door, would have received the mandatory notification that a registered sex offender was his neighbor under New York law. Now, in that neighborhood, those notifications possibly pile up on your doorstep like takeout menus, but it's quite a challenge to maintain the "I barely knew the guy" defense when you're sharing a wall, getting killer real estate deals, and visiting his island on vacation. Another piece of neighborhood gossip that I haven't seen much news about is found in an FBI email summary, document EFTA 0164891, which contains the allegation that Lutnick made his money through Ponzi schemes and money laundering, and says that Epstein sold Lutnick a home for $10 that was worth millions. I've Googled the name of the man who made that allegation and didn't find anything. Now, Woody Allen does show up a lot in the Epstein files, and it seems that he and Epstein were good friends and hung out a lot together. There's no evidence in there that Allen cheated on his daughter or anything like that, so I suppose that that's good. It shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise that Jeffrey Epstein's social Ponzi scheme, as his network is described by the FT, eventually found its way into the world of cryptocurrency. This brings us right back to Jeff's neighbor, Howard Lutnick. Aside from being the current US Commerce Secretary, Lutnick's firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, acts as the primary custodian for the reserves of Tether, the world's largest crypto stablecoin. Tether was co-founded by Brock Pierce, a former child actor from the Mighty Ducks. Don't worry though, he's not a child anymore. And he successfully transitioned into a career as a crypto mogul. The newly released files show that Pierce and Epstein were in regular contact for years, exchanging emails that jumped between high-level investment advice and more social invitations. In one email from 2018, Pierce reportedly invited Epstein to Antigua for a boat trip, featuring what he described as Ukraine's finest. Now, not wanting to jump to conclusions, I did a quick Google search, and it seems that Ukraine is most famous for borscht, so that's probably what Brock was talking about. I won't lie, it seems like a terrible idea to eat beetroot soup on a boat, but it's not illegal, especially in international waters. It appears that through Pierce, Epstein managed to secure a $3 million stake in the crypto exchange Coinbase back in 2014. This turned out to be one of the few times Epstein's financial genius actually resulted in a profit. He sold half of that stake in 2018 for $15 million, and the remaining half of that position will have doubled in value again by the time of Coinbase's IPO. While the world of crypto was busy out at sea eating soup, the traditional banking sector was having a much harder time explaining its own paperwork. One of the more interesting parts of this release is the inclusion of suspicious activity reports, or SARs. These documents are pretty much never revealed to the public. I can't think of a prior example. They aren't entered into evidence in court, and you can't even access them through a FOIA request. They are submitted by financial institutions to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a bureau of the Department of the Treasury, to report suspected money laundering, fraud, or violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. It's illegal to disclose to the customer that an SAR has been filed, a concept known as tipping off. The files reveal that major financial institutions were flagging Epstein's accounts for suspected human trafficking and money laundering long before his 2019 arrest. Last year, a British court heard that Jess Staley, then a top executive at JP Morgan, had lobbied for the bank to keep Epstein as a client in 2011, when other executives considered debanking him over their human trafficking concerns. The FT points out that while they were worried about having him as a client, it wasn't until 2019 that they finally filed a suspicious activity report over their concerns. The 2019 SAR flagged transactions with leading Wall Street figures, including Leon Black, the co founder of the private equity group Apollo Global Management. People have pointed to an email that Epstein sent to himself about Bill Gates, the one I mentioned earlier, as possible evidence of him bribing his wealthy friends. But the best example of using information to leverage a client that I could see in the files relates to Leon Black. In 2013, when Black seemed reluctant to pay an inexplicably large fee to Epstein, Epstein reminded him, Leon, as you're well aware, there's little I won't do for you, and a great deal that I've already done, both known and some things that will need to remain unknown. Black went on to pay Epstein over $150 million for tax advice that a congressional committee later described as being information that was already in the public domain or already provided by Black's lawyers. Black has told the press through his lawyers that there's absolutely no truth to any allegations of misconduct against him. The latest files show that in the years following his Florida plea deal, Jeffrey Epstein and his celebrity friends went to extraordinary lengths to launder his reputation. This wasn't just a matter of hiring a publicist. It was a multi-million-dollar high-tech effort to convince the world that Jeffrey was actually a misunderstood Wall Street Renaissance man. The man leading the digital scrub was a bizarre character called Al Seckel, who described himself as a popularizer of visual illusions and a cognitive scientist. In truth, he had no real qualifications, but he somehow managed to marry Isabel Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's sister and the daughter of the press baron Robert Maxwell. Seckel was given the job by Epstein of burying articles that used pesky words like pedophile and replacing them with headlines about Epstein's philanthropic work and his promotion of scientists. He wrote to Epstein about how he had hacked Epstein's Wikipedia page to swap his arrest mugshot for a more dignified photograph, a move his team described as an important victory. Seckel organized an event called the Mindshift Conference, which was supposed to be a highbrow gathering of Nobel laureates on Epstein's Island in 2011. If you could get enough famous scientists to eat soup on your boat, people might eventually forget about the 82-page prosecution memo sitting in a drawer in Florida. In a story full of mysterious endings, Seckles is one of the strangest. He seems to have died in France in 2015 after falling or jumping from a cliff near his home. Because his death remained unconfirmed by authorities for some time, rumors have persisted that he may have faked his own death, which, for a man who made a career out of visual illusions and cleaning up inconvenient online footprints, would have been the perfect ending. The scrubbing didn't stop with Google searches. Steve Bannon, the former Trump strategist, worked with Epstein, strategizing and filming a sympathetic documentary around 2019. The Department of Justice released about 2 hours of this footage in the files, footage which was intended to portray Epstein as a financial genius who had simply made one understandable mistake. According to the files, Bannon even suggested that Woody Allen could help edit the film. Epstein's calendar shows nearly 100 scheduled meetings with Allen, including trips to a film center specifically to watch Allen edit. It's a touching vision of an artistic collaboration, a populist media firebrand and a legendary director teaming up to help a convicted sex offender polish his public image. Amusingly, some people seem to be falling for this propaganda. You can see quite a few positive comments under the videos posted on YouTube. Epstein also received a lot of helpful advice from his famous friends about how to deal with his PR problems. The linguist Noam Chomsky, who described his weekends with Epstein as wonderful, advised him in 2019 to simply ignore the growing press scrutiny. He characterized the reporting as a form of hysteria, a take so tone-deaf it suggests that even the world's most famous intellectual can lose the plot when billionaire-funded dinners are on the line. Even the legal advice was specialized. A protege of Alan Dershowitz's named Mitch Weber, who later worked in the Trump administration, emailed Epstein to go over the legality of transporting a minor for the purposes of sex to jurisdictions where the age of consent was below 18. Catherine Ruemmler, a former White House attorney, gave Epstein advice on what Trump should say if he was ever asked about his associations with Epstein. And for the final touch of PR polish, Sir Richard Branson reportedly suggested a strategy where Bill Gates would vouch for Epstein as a brilliant advisor. The idea was that if enough people like Gates and Branson were willing to look past the slip-up, the rest of the world would eventually do the same. It seems that in Epstein's circle, due diligence didn't mean checking for crime, it meant checking if your friends were famous enough to make the crimes disappear. Now, while everyone has been busy talking about the files, it's worth keeping in mind that the official position of the US government is unchanged. The FBI are saying that their systematic review revealed no incriminating client list and that they didn't uncover any evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. It is a remarkably strong statement, especially since the Metropolitan Police in London seem to have looked at the exact same data but with redactions and reached a very different conclusion. Earlier this week, the Met launched a criminal investigation into Peter Mandelson for misconduct in public office, a charge that in the UK can carry a sentence of life imprisonment. Mandelson, who was once the business secretary and a key architect of the Labour Party, has long been known as the Prince of Darkness, for his ability to survive political scandal. But even for him, this might be the end of the road. The files revealed that while Mandelson was a serving government minister, he was providing Epstein with real-time insight into market-sensitive UK policy. He sent emails to Epstein containing confidential briefings on the 2008 financial crisis, including early confirmation of a €500 billion bailout and discussions on how the UK's bankers' bonus tax would be designed. This sort of information could have been used for insider trading by Epstein. In one email, Mandelson even suggested that the head of JP Morgan should mildly threaten the UK Chancellor over those rules. The Mandelson-Epstein relationship had a more personal financial side to it too. Bank records show that Epstein wired £10,000 to Mandelson's then partner, now husband, to pay for an osteopathy court. For those of you outside the UK, an osteopath is some sort of a witch doctor. In an email from 2009, Mandelson even reminded Epstein to label the transfer as a loan to avoid a gift tax filing. The fallout from these witch doctor tuition fees has been total. Mandelson has already resigned from the Labour Party and the House of Lords. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who appointed Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to Washington, despite knowing about the Epstein links, is now fighting for his political life. This week, Starmer was forced to apologize to Epstein's victims, admitting that Mandelson had repeatedly lied about the depth of his relationship with the financier. The fallout isn't limited to the UK. In Slovakia, a former foreign minister and advisor to the prime minister was forced to resign this week after files showed him joking with Epstein about gorgeous girls in Kiev. In Norway, police have opened an aggravated corruption investigation into a former prime minister, looking into whether he received improper gifts and loans from Epstein. Even in Turkey, prosecutors have launched an inquiry into allegations that children were trafficked into Epstein's network from Turkey. It's a striking contrast. In Europe and Asia, homes are being raided and senior officials are resigning over the contents of the files. Meanwhile, in Washington, law enforcement authorities are still insisting that there's no evidence of any wrongdoing. One might conclude that in the business of political accountability, the Atlantic Ocean acts as a very effective filter. Elon Musk spent years denying any relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, while using Epstein's name to attack others. He claimed that the photo of him with Ghislaine Maxwell was because she had photobombed him at a party. He even used his Everything app, which can also be used for tweets, to claim that Epstein tried repeatedly to get him to visit the island, but that Musk had always refused. The new files tell a very different story, where Elon's name is mentioned more than 1,000 times, and instead of turning down invitations, he's begging for them. One of the funniest entries has Elon emailing Epstein on Christmas morning, I imagine as his kids are opening their gifts, to say that he wanted to hit the party scene and let loose, specifically noting that a peaceful island experience is the opposite of what he was looking for. Epstein, ever the attentive host, warned that the ratio on the island might make Musk's then-wife uncomfortable, to which Musk replied, "Ratio is not a problem." While Musk has since acknowledged the emails are genuine, he maintains that they were misinterpreted and that he ultimately never set foot on the island due to logistics. In another email, Musk seems angry to have been invited to an event in New York where diplomats would be present. Epstein calms him down by saying that there would be no one at his party over the age of 25 and all are very cute. After that, we have the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew, who at this point King Charles must be booking in for a car tour of Paris's tunnels. The files reveal that Epstein was aggressively lobbying his favorite neighbor, Howard Lutnick, to give Andrew a job or a lucrative role, providing introductions at Cantor Fitzgerald. It's quite a look at the unseen mechanics of power. A royal prince using a convicted sex offender as a headhunter to get a job at a grubby Wall Street brokerage. While Andrew's brother, King Charles, recently stripped him of his royal titles and evicted him from his home at Royal Lodge, the files still suggest that the rot went deep. Amusingly, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson seem to have invited Epstein, along with Harvey Weinstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, to their daughter's 18th birthday. The only thing I can say about that is that maybe once girls are over the age of 18, they're safe around that crew. We've already seen emails from Andrew asking for inappropriate friends, and photos that the Department of Justice has finally released show the Duke in various compromising positions. It seems that whether you're a tech billionaire or a member of the British royal family, Jeffrey Epstein was the man who you turned to when you wanted to find a party, a job, or a way to make the rules of normal society simply disappear. While Jeffrey Epstein was busy trying to convince the world that he was a philanthropist, the latest files suggest that he was also pursuing a much darker, almost sci-fi obsession, seeding the world with his own DNA. A bombshell email from September 2011, sent by Sarah Ferguson, appears to confirm that Epstein may have actually succeeded in fathering at least one child. Ferguson wrote to Epstein saying that she had heard from the Duke, presumably Prince Andrew, that Jeffrey had a baby boy. She even expressed hurt in another email that he had disappeared and hadn't told her he was having a baby. The most horrific piece of evidence is found in a document with the serial number EFTA 027-31361. It reads like a private diary of a trauma written by a young victim who describes being treated not as a person, but as a biological asset. The writer describes being under the constant control of Ghislaine Maxwell. The document is filled with confusion and fear. It's really the stuff of nightmares. I would strongly advise against reading it. The victim describes being made to feel like a human incubator and mentions Epstein's obsession with a superior gene pool. Most chillingly, she describes giving birth and having a child immediately taken away by a man she refers to as Mr. M. I only got 10 to 15 minutes to hold and feed her before they took her, she writes. She is mine and I want her back. This diary, if that's what it is, includes clippings about child trafficking and 21st century slavery. It paints a picture of these people, Epstein, Maxwell, and whoever else was involved, who viewed other human beings as mere property to be exploited for their own insane ends. It's a stark and horrifying reminder of the misery these people inflicted on others. I'm really not sure what to make of that terrible document, and once again, there's no evidence in there that I can find showing that law enforcement investigated any of its claims. It's worth adding that Virginia Giuffre, in her posthumous memoir, told the story of Epstein and Maxwell pitching a plan for her to have a baby for them while on Epstein Island. I've discussed in my prior videos how a lot of people either don't want to admit or just can't believe how awful the people in these documents are. This seems to be especially the case when their favorite politician, celebrity, or tech billionaire was involved. As I've said before, this isn't about politics. It's not about the right and the left. It's about monstrous people who have done terrible things. Joe Rogan had a guy on his show a few days ago called Mike Benz. I've never heard of him before and had to Google him, but it seems that he's big on Twitter and worked for the US Department of State. Here's a quick clip about what he had to say.
I don't think that the majority or anything close to it of the women were technically, I think it was largely
young,
very young, barely legal, so to speak. But and I know that there were cases of underage, but I think
Most of it was just
most of it was just very, very young, but not like
20-year-old
not like
girls,
13
18-year-old girls.
type thing. And then remember, because this is an international enterprise, and many of the clients are like in countries that don't necessarily have the same norms about that that we do. You can very easily see someone getting involved in that just because girls juice deals.
Now, I don't have much time to dig into this. There's a very good video on a channel called Too Lazy to Try that breaks it down, but it's a massive mischaracterization of what you'll find with even a casual glance at the Epstein files. I'm not sure why someone would want to go on the biggest podcast in the world to gloss over the horrors of what Epstein and his co-conspirators got up to. It's truly revolting. The comments section of that Joe Rogan podcast tears this guy apart, but it's really wild at this point to try and sanitize Epstein and his accomplices. Children were horribly abused, and some of the documents that I've seen were absolutely nightmarish. And this guy seems to explain it with the phrase,
girls juice deals.
As I get near the end of this video, it's worth reminding you of what an absolute monster Ghislaine Maxwell is, especially when we know that after her meeting with Todd Blanche, her prison accommodations were upgraded, and there's even talks of her possibly being pardoned. While she might look like a nice lady, smiling in all of the photos, her victims describe how she personally joined in their abuse and how she inflicted violence upon them. One survivor described Maxwell as the person who opened the door to hell. Just because someone looks nice and is well spoken doesn't mean that they're a good person. I'll wrap up by telling you about a very similar but grubbier story from Belgium, the Marc Dutroux story. Marc was an unemployed electrician who abducted, abused, and murdered his victims. Like Epstein, he was arrested for sex crimes early on, and like Epstein, he was let off easy, serving just 3 years of a 13-year sentence. He continued on with his terrible crimes as soon as he was released. The second time he was arrested in 1996, he claimed to be a small part of a much bigger organization. One of his accomplices claimed that they had been providing girls to government officials. Like Epstein, Marc had unexplained wealth too. As an unemployed electrician, he somehow owned 10 properties and had a net worth of around 6 million Belgian francs. The case was notoriously poorly investigated. At one point, after being tipped off, the police searched his home while 2 kidnapped girls were locked in the basement. The girls' voices were even heard by the police officers, but they didn't follow up to work out where they were coming from. One of the officers who dropped the ball on these early leads was later promoted, which did little to quiet the rumors of a cover-up. Perhaps most inexplicably, DNA evidence from the crime scenes went unanalyzed for years, and when the original prosecutor began making waves and actually following the leads, he was pulled from the case and replaced by a prosecutor with next to no experience. The public anger in Belgium, where 300,000 people turned out to protest the mishandling of the case, led to the complete reorganization of Belgium's law enforcement agencies. So what have we actually learned from 3.5 million pages of raw intelligence, flight logs, and high society gossip released in the Epstein files? Well, depending on who you ask, the answer is either everything or nothing at all. The Department of Justice is saying that this data dump marks the end of the Epstein scandal and that there's nothing more to see. Critics and survivor advocates point out that only about half of the 6 million files have actually been released and that the redactions still need to be explained. When reading through the victim statements, I'm somewhat reminded of the famous line from The Great Gatsby. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together. and let other people clean up the mess they had made. It's a poetic sentiment, but looking through these documents, carelessness is a bit too generous. The people implicated in this case might not have cared about the victims, but it wasn't carelessness that built up this vast crime network that was used to inflict misery on its victims and defend the perpetrators. It's a terrible mistake, too, to confuse the recent government claims of transparency for real justice. While the government points to the volume of documents released as proof of their openness, these files weren't given. They were forced from their grasp by a mounting surge of public anger. Now the people implicated seem to be losing their patience with the questions they're being asked. Just this week, a reporter in the Oval Office asked President Trump about the survivors' concerns that the redactions are being used to cover up key names. A valid question. Instead of addressing it, the president tore into the journalist.
What did you say? Go ahead.
What would you say to the survivors who feel like they haven't gotten justice?
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile on your face.
I'm asking you about survivors.
You know why? You know why you're not smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth, and you're a very dishonest organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
Ultimately, the Epstein files aren't just a collection of names and stories. They're a map of a world where accountability is a luxury that only applies to people without a yacht or a $10 real estate deal on the Upper East Side. If you found this video interesting, you should watch my video on how even typing the word Epstein was being blocked on TikTok next. Don't forget to check out our sponsor Brilliant using the link in the video description, and see you in the next video. Bye.